about faith and values and politics. We're bringing together 3 presidential candidates to discuss all of that. Joining us now is Senator Hillary Clinton. Nice to see you, Senator. I'm well. How are you? Nice to see you. Have a seat. Mike Gravel said last night that you lack moral judgment because of your vote in the war in Iraq. You blame President Bush. Do you feel you have a moral responsibility for your vote?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that every vote I take carries with it a moral responsibility. And it is always a challenge to try to arrive at what you think is the right thing to do based on the information and the assessment that you make at a time. And sometimes it turns out that you're right, and sometimes it doesn't. But certainly every vote has a moral implication. You know, we're debating immigration right now in the Senate. I think that is a highly moral debate as to what we will do as a nation with respect to immigrants. And the faith community has been very involved in that, as they have been with questions of war and questions of poverty, too.
You've been, though, very reluctant to say, I'm sorry for my vote. Explain that to me.
Well, what I've said is that if I had known then what I know now about how President Bush would use the authority that he was given, I never would have voted to give it to him. So I think that is taking responsibility. And I don't think you get off the hook. I think you don't turn the page by saying that was really an unfortunate outcome. I think you take responsibility and then you move on. And certainly what I'm trying to do now is to figure out how we get out of Iraq and how we get out as soon as possible, bringing our troops out, but trying to encourage through both carrots and sticks the Iraqi government to take responsibility for their own country and to try to get more vigorous regional and international diplomacy involved as well.
You don't talk a lot about your faith, truly. I know because I've Googled everything you've ever said, actually. But I'm going to ask you a delicate question. Infidelity in your marriage was very public, and I have to imagine it was incredibly difficult to deal with. And I'd like to know how your faith helped you get through it.
Well, I'm not sure I would have gotten through it without my faith. And, you know, I take my faith very seriously and very personally. And I come from a tradition that is perhaps a little too suspicious of people who wear their faith on their sleeves. So that a lot of the talk about and advertising about faith doesn't come naturally to me. It is something that, you know, I keep thinking of the Pharisees and all of the Sunday school lessons and readings that I had as a child. But I think your faith guides you every day, certainly mine does. But at those moments in time when you're tested, it is absolutely essential that you be grounded in your faith. For some people, being tested leads them to faith. For some people, being tested in cruel and tragic ways leads them away from faith. For me, because I've been tested in ways that are both publicly known and those that are not so well known or not known at all, my faith and the support of my extended faith family, people whom I knew who were literally praying for me in prayer chains, who were prayer warriors for me, and people whom I didn't know, who I would meet or get a letter from, sustained me through a very difficult time. But I am very grateful that I had a grounding in faith that gave me the courage and the strength to do what I thought was right, regardless of what the world thought. And that's all one can expect or hope for.
When you pray, and this is a very personal question, and you can
go ahead,
all right, it's just us girls. What do you ask for? What do you ask God for?
Well, it depends upon the time of day, and sometimes I say, oh Lord, why can't you help me lose weight? Sometimes it's obviously praying for discernment, for wisdom, for strength, for courage, praying for my family and my friends. I mean, praying for people whom I don't have any personal connection with, that I hear about or I know about, or that I'm struck by. I'll tell you, your question sort of prompted this in my head. I was at a Methodist church in Decorah, Iowa, and I was attending Sunday morning service, and I walked in and I met the pastor, Carol Kress, who welcomed me to her church and her congregation, and she introduced me to this man from the Congo, who the church had taken in as a refugee. And he said that he wanted to ask for my help for the people of the Congo. And he told me about how he had been campaigning for democracy, and he'd been thrown in jail, and he'd been beaten, and then he'd been dragged from the jail by the officials, and he'd been hung on a tree and left to die. And the members of his church rescued him. And he told me this just as I was walking into the sanctuary, and I was just so overcome, and I spent much of the service thinking about and praying about these people in this church in the Congo, I don't even know where in the Congo, who had saved this man and given him the chance to come and witness to somebody like me. So I pray for all kinds of things, some of it, to be honest, trivial and self-serving and all the rest of it. And when I do that, I try to say, oh, come on, you can do better than that.
To God or your question?
Well, I say it to myself, because I assume, that there is the rolling of eyes going on, that I certainly can do better than that. But, somebody asked me, to go back to one of your earlier questions, somebody asked me if I were a praying person, shortly after we'd been in the White House. And, I said, yes, I'd been fortunate. I was raised to pray, as a little girl, saying my prayers at night, saying grace at meals, praying in, church. I see my old friend, my youth minister, praying in MYF, our Methodist Youth Fellowship. And so they asked me, well, are you a praying person? And I said, well, fortunately, I have been always a praying person, and I'm grateful for that. But if I had not been a praying person, shortly after coming to the White House, I would have become one in a big hurry.
Senator, we have 7 minutes left, and I want to get to a couple of questions from the